video, we are going to be talking about how Democrats are inching closer to possibly taking back the Senate majority in 2026. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because of a recent poll where Alaska Senator now has a -8 approval rating. This is the worst he's ever recorded, and not only does he just have a -8 approval rating, he's going up against a very tough opponent, uh, Mary Mary Pelota. I'm sorry, I tried practicing how to pronounce her name. I know you're gonna get mad in the comments for me not being able to pronounce it. I tried to. Anyway, this lady, Mary, is running for the Senate, and she was able to win Alaska's only House district in 2022. She did lose in 2024 but only by a 2-point margin, and I do believe it is possible she could have won if uh there wasn't a independent also running. Who really knows? But still a very close and competitive race for such a red state, and she is now running for the Senate in the 2026 election against a now unpopular Republican senator. Now, let's say Alaska does go blue. Let's say she's able to barely sneak by and win Alaska. We now have a bunch of other possible battleground states that she could now go for, or that Democrats could now go for. Now, I do think Florida is safe. Let me go ahead and have safe. And I already filled in most of these other states. States that aren't really too interesting to talk about, where Democrats don't have a realistic possibility of winning. Now, the first state I want to talk about out of these states that Democrats would also have to win, following a win in Alaska against the unpopular Republican senator, will be a state like Nebraska. Now, in Nebraska's Senate race, um, it's a independent running against the Republican, not a Democrat, which I do think it is important for Democrats to not try to run someone in 2026, as we have Dan Osborne running for election in the Nebraska Senate race in 2026. And he did come within 7 points of winning, but this Nebraska senator, let me make sure I get his name right. Yeah, Pete Ricketts, I believe is his name. I could be wrong. Yeah. Pete, yeah, right here. He is a unpopular Republican senator. He has one of the lowest approval ratings in the Senate for senators. So with an independent like Dan Osborne, who has now built up um a name for himself after the last election, it is very possible, and with help from the Democratic Party of Nebraska, I could definitely see Nebraska going independent or democratically aligned, and this would be a very close Senate race that I could definitely see Democrats picking up. Also, if we look over here, if we go to polling for uh, we see in every poll, Democrats are projected to win the generic vote in the 2026 midterms. And now, most polls have it around 5 to 6 points. And, let's say Democrats get a 6 point advantage than they did in 2024 on local state levels. Well, that's 6 points that Dan Osborne lost by, and he would have to make up basically 7 points against someone who has a bad approval rating. So Nebraska could definitely go democratically aligned, although I do think it would be very close. And if anyone's gonna do it, it's gonna be Dan Osborne. It's not going to be a Democrat. I also want then we can go over and talk about Iowa, which is kind of tricky, as Iowa did have their incumbent senator is not running for re-election, and Iowa is now split up. Actually, Iowa senator that is not running for re-election, um, Ernst, she she made the comment where she said, I'm sure you've all heard it, where she was like, where someone said cutting Medicaid is going to cause people to die. And then she said, well, we're all going to die. That was a couple months ago, but that is her main reason for not running for re election, as she announced that she wouldn't be running for re election. After that comment was made in 2020, she won 51% of the popular vote. Um, she is honestly one of the weaker Republican candidates in the Senate to not be able to win such a red state, because Trump won it by 13 points in 24. We go back to 2016, Trump won it by 9 points, and in 2020, Trump won it by 8 points. She was underperforming Trump, a sort of an unpopular president at the time, by 2 points. So she's clearly a weak candidate, and if anything, I think Republicans can find a stronger candidate in Iowa to help boost them in Iowa. I still think Iowa will go to Dems by possibly 8 points, but I have seen a lot of people feeling like Iowa could be in the cards for Democrats, but I'm just going to go ahead and say that's not the case. If anything, it's a good thing that the incumbent Iowa senator is retiring, as she is unpopular and does underperform compared to President Trump on a national level. We can now and go talk about Texas, which Texas is another one of these seats where it's like Democrats have been eyeing Texas forever. If we go over to, when was it? The 28, yes, 2018. Ted Cruz only kept his Senate seat by 2.6 points, and after this Senate race, a lot of Democrats were hoping that maybe by 2020 they could win a Senate race. Then they lost by 10 points in Texas in 2020, and now we're over. And in 2024, Ted Cruz was able to win by 8.5 points, which was very disappointing for Democrats, as even on a national level, we see in 2020, Texas only went to Trump by 6 points. That's a pretty small margin considering it's Texas. So Texas was shifting left for a while, but in 2024, I would like to say all Democratic gains were lost in Texas by 2024 after that election. So I do still expect Texas to go Republican, but in order for Texas to go Democrat, James Tallarico would have to be the Democratic nominee in Texas, and Ken Paxton would have to be the Republican nominee in Texas. Now, if those two things don't happen, which I do expect James Tallarico to be the Democrat nominee for Senate in Texas, I don't think Ken Paxton will be able to win uh, the primary in Texas. And even if he does win the primary, I still think Texas is just on the slimmest margins, maybe 1 point to Ken Paxton. But I don't think Texas is a seat Democrats can win. I do think it will be closer than what most people expect. It definitely will be closer than the 2024 and 2020 Senate elections, but I don't think it's in reach for Democrats. We can now go and talk about our next somewhat competitive race where Sherrod Brown, Democrat, is running to regain his seat in Ohio after losing it in 2024. Right now, the incumbent is John Husted. Yes, Husted? I'm not completely sure. Um, he was put in that seat, I believe. He was put in that seat to replace J.D. Vance, who was leaving the Ohio. Uh, he left his Ohio Senate seat to go be vice president. Hustert has never actually been elected in Ohio as a senator, but he is the incumbent. So I do think Ohio is up for grabs. As we saw if we go back to 2018, that was the last time Democrats won Ohio, where Brown was able to take it by around 7 points. But 2018, you see, in 2016, a Republican took Ohio by 20 points in the Senate, and then 2018, we see a Democrat take the Senate seat by 7 points. I definitely do think if Trump's unpopularity continues to skyrocket, especially with what's been going on with ICE, I do expect Ohio to possibly go blue. I do think Ohio can go blue, and if Democrats are going to retake a solid majority, 51 seats in the Senate, this will have to be a seat that they do pick up. Now, Michigan, I do expect Michigan to be close, as in 2020, the incumbent senator decided to retire. Peters is retiring, not seeking re election. Peters in 2020 won it by 1.7 points, and in 2024, the most recent Senate race in Michigan only went to the Democratic candidate by the slimmest of margins. But we do have to remember 2024, very pro Republican year, very pro Trump year. I expect 2026 to be the same political environment that we were in 2018, where we will see Democrats win some seats by 3 to 7 points in states that people would consider swing states. So Michigan will have to be a state that Democrats win, but Pete Buttigieg and Gretchen Whitmer have both decided not to run for election, Senate election in Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer being governor of Michigan, and then Pete Buttigieg is an overall popular Democrat across the country. So that will hurt Democrats if Pete Buttigieg or Gretchen Whitmer was running for 2026. Michigan would be a slam dunk. But we do have some less popular Democrats running, like Haley Stevenson, who's a local congresswoman there. And there's also a local state senator running to be the Democratic nominee. And then most likely one of those, the Democrat will be facing Mike Rogers, who is also a local congressman in Michigan. Uh, but I do still expect Michigan to be going blue. And in a scenario where Democrats are able to take Ohio, I do expect Michigan to go to the Democrats by around 2 to 3 points. Now, North Carolina, Roy Cooper, former governor of North Carolina. Roy Cooper has never lost a state election in North Carolina. I do expect Roy Cooper to take North Carolina pretty easily. Most polling shows him winning right now by around 4 points. Roy Cooper is a established figure in North Carolina. He's got plenty of cash on hand. He's got the entire Democratic establishment backing. He will take North Carolina. Now in Georgia, John Ossoff is running for re-election in Georgia. John Ossoff is a stronger candidate than most people think, as in 2020, the Democratic establishment was really backing Warnock. Warnock was really the race that they were trying to win. They didn't really expect John Ossoff to win in 2020, and John Ossoff was really left to fend for himself. John Ossoff is a very strong candidate, and in 2026, he was able to win by 1.2 points with less of a backing than Warnock had. And John Ossoff has the most cash on hand in the Georgia Senate race. Last time I checked, he had around $25 million on hand to spend on advertisements. Um, and with just all that money, Democratic backing, I do expect John Ossoff to take the Georgia Senate seat by around 2 to 3 points. And he's also doing roughly 3 points plus in polling. Now, Maine is going to be a very tough Senate seat for Democrats to win. Of course, we have Graham Plattner, who's running for election in Maine, and you also have Susan Collins, not popular Republican senator, but a Republican senator who has shown her ability to win over and over. Now, in 2024, we had a Democrat win the Maine Senate seat by 17 points. Democrats do very good in the state of Maine. If we go on a presidential level, Harris won these districts by she won Maine's first district by 20 points, and then Maine as a whole by around 7 points. Trump did win Maine's second district by 9 points, but that's really just a rural area. As a whole, Maine is very Demi. And then we even go to governors. As in 2022, a very pro-Republican year, Democrats still took Maine by 13 points. So Maine is definitely in reach, even with Republicans saying Susan Collins, she has established herself in Maine as a very establishment there. And a lot of this helps with her being a more liberal Republican, but I don't think that's going to cut it in 2026. She's also pretty old, and people are starting to get sick of old Susan Collins. As we see, Susan Collins had the Senate position forever. She's had it, I believe, since 90s. She was running for her fourth term, I believe. Running 2002, she was running, and I believe if we go back, yes, she has been in the Senate seat since 1996. I do think someone like Graham Plattner can definitely win Maine, especially with people just getting sick of the old establishment guard of both parties. I think Graham Plattner is the Democrat to win Maine, and if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be Graham Plattner. He's got plenty of backing. He's probably has the best grassroots movement out of any Senate campaign that any Democrat has ran so far, maybe besides James Tallarico. So if Democrats are going to take a majority back in the Senate, it's going to have to be Graham Plattner that wins it for them. And let me just add, I do want to add preset colors. Oh my gosh, my keyboard's. And then I do take, you know what, just Dan Osborne. Dan. I do expect Dan. If Democrats want to even solidify the majority better, they are going to need Dan to win Nebraska. And this is my guide on how Democrats are able to win back the Senate majority in 2026. This is not a best case scenario, though. This is just the seats that are going to be needed to win for Democrats to get a solid majority in the Senate and to stop President Trump's agenda or Project 2025. Tell me what you think below. And anyway, thank you all for watching, and peace out.